Okay, I think we have the green light to get started. So I'm going to introduce myself and start this dialogue. Welcome on a Wednesday afternoon here in Philadelphia. I'm not sure where everybody's joining us from, but the Center for the Preservation of Civil Rights Sites is pleased and honored to have today the next in its series of dialogues, an informal series of conversations with folks connected to the worlds and ideas and practices of Black heritage and specifically heritage sites, preservation of heritage sites related to civil rights. Today we are joined by Melvin Marshall and Maya Thomas, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But I will first introduce myself. My name is Randy Mason. I'm the faculty director of the Center for the Preservation of Civil Rights Sites here at the Weitzman School of Design at University of Pennsylvania. Just as folks are filtering in to our Zoom room, just wanted to let folks know that that we'll aim to have the event take up about an hour. We'll do it very informally, just with a series of conversations and questions among our guests. And we encourage everyone to pop in observations and questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we will reserve some time toward the end of our hour to take a look at some of those questions and comments and weave those into the conversation as we have time to do it. First of all, let me say a little bit about the Center for the Preservation of Civil Rights Sites. It is an initiative of the graduate program in historic preservation here at Penn. Started a few years ago with a partnership with Tuskegee University and their Department of Architecture. And we were able to kind of grow the effort into a multifaceted research center that takes on issues related in really broad terms to all of the words in our title, preservation, civil rights, and sites. Now, we don't try to define those in an exclusive way. We try to kind of open up each of those subjects to start conversations about exactly what do we mean by civil rights? What does heritage related to civil rights look like? We think it looks like more than just the traditional buildings and house museums and other kinds of typical heritage forms. And what do we mean by preservation when we think about histories of civil rights and these different forms of heritage? So apropos the kind of conversation opening function that we like to think of our title, we do these series of dialogues to learn more about what others are seeing and thinking and hoping for the preservation of civil rights sites. To that end, we welcome Melvin Marshall, as I'll give quick bios before we kind of start out the conversation. Mr. Marshall is a senior curator at the Band of Vices, which is an arts and culture gallery in the West Adams district of LA, committed to providing a platform for often overlooked creative communities and overlooked narratives through a diverse set of initiatives, including art exhibits of a canonical form. Mr. Marshall was also the first chief curator of a Museum of Contemporary African Diasporan Arts in Brooklyn, about which we'll talk about in just a moment, and was the co-curator of a 2003 exhibit that I'll ask him about in just a moment. He comes to us with a master's degree, among other qualifications, master's degrees in both contemporary art history from Sotheby's Institute and also Goldsmiths College, University of London. Melvin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great. And I know you're not in Philadelphia, at an undisclosed location in California.
Yes.
And let me also welcome my longtime colleague, Maya Thomas, who is an artist and preservationist, who's also located in Los Angeles at the moment. and is the co-founder of a really amazing initiative here in Philadelphia called the Docks Thrash House Project that envisions restoration or restorative block level development in an historic Black neighborhood called Sharswood here in Philadelphia. Since 2016, she's spearheaded this effort in a neighborhood to help keep long-term residents in place, celebrate the neighborhood's multifaceted history, and create the future now, as she has put it. So we'll hear more about Maya's perspectives on what it means to create the future now in terms of heritage and artwork. Personally, I think I was really excited to be able to organize this dialogue with Melvin and Maya and Sarah Lerner and Steph Garcia on the center's team. Because we typically, this is a bit atypical for us, and we usually engage with folks who are scholars, historians, social scientists, or designers, architects, and so on. And we look forward to this, I think, different kind of dialogue to look particularly at the civil rights, the issues of civil rights heritage and its preservation and visibility through the lens of art and art collecting and curatorial work. I think the work that you both are doing and have done are really interesting additions, if you look at it from the preservation perspective, giving us additional perspectives and tools to think about what it means to preserve civil rights heritage. So I really welcome this, what hopefully will be like a great learning opportunity for those of us who come from the quote unquote capital P preservation world.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask an actual question instead of giving lots of introductions. Melvin, I wanted to ask you about your work at Mokada in Brooklyn, Museum of Contemporary African Diaspora and Arts. You said that as we were talking leading up to the dialogue, that you'd been starting to collect and curate African American prints yourself back in the 1990s. And I just wanted to kind of ask you what drew you to begin that project of collecting, and how did it lead into the curatorial work of that big exhibit in 2003 in Brooklyn?
Thank you. After I left undergraduate at UC Berkeley, I started my career on Wall Street, and from there in New York City. And from there, I began wanting to learn more about this idea of collecting art. So I started with prints, with African-American printmakers. And one thing that worked well for me was that I got a chance to have some really good mentors. And I think that was really a very important aspect of me starting my collection well, because they were like, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. And they're like, but ultimately you believe in your gut, and you gotta just go with your gut. So I want to start collecting older, more established artists. So the Romare Beardens, the Jacob Lawrences, the Elizabeth Catletts of the world, back in, we're talking a couple of decades ago. And so I started there, and from there, I began to just expand my horizons. And I was really interested in wanting to learn more about the sort of academic aspects. But a question, I was like, why aren't there as many written documents about the artists that I like, as opposed to the Picassos, the Manets, the more important artists of the world? And my mother, she had a very interesting thing. She goes, well, maybe you should be one of the people to start writing about them. I'm like, my degree from Berkeley was in the sciences. It was, chemistry, biochemistry, stuff like that. So I said, well, I'm not a writer. And she says, don't tell me that I spent all that money on your college degree and you don't know how to write. Right? And I was like, well, that's a good point. I guess I never seen myself as being a writer, but of course I was. So I started to write about art. And then that was the way that I began to learn about, you know, the artist. And so that's how I got more entrenched. And then after my, I transitioned from Wall Street to the art world. A few years after that.
Great. So one of the reasons we were excited to connect the two of you in this conversation was that you're both connected to prints as an art form, and wanted to ask you both questions about that. And Melvin, in a second, I'll ask you about From Challenge to Triumph, the exhibit that you helped or curating back in 2003. Maya, first, let me turn to you and ask you a little bit about your path into these subjects, combining lots of different interests that you're bringing together.
So originally from Los Angeles, and then attended Penn, learned about the Doc Slash House, and embedded in this amazing community called Sharswood in North Philadelphia. Fell in love with it and saw a lot of similarities to neighborhoods in Los Angeles that I grew up in, and wanted to do something about it. And so that's how I learned so much about Doc Thrash. He's an amazing, innovative printmaker, invented his own printmaking technique, became famous for it. He was very, very active during the WPA era and the Depression era, and was very influential in actually spurring the Black arts movement in Philadelphia along Ridge Avenue. Started a club called the Pyramid Club for affluent African Americans. And I just got really, really deep into that history and wanted to kind of influence who was coming into the neighborhood, and look for other artists that were in the same tradition as Doc Sash. And so started meeting other printmakers. It's a wonderful, wonderful community of printmakers. It's really do it yourself, figure out how to do it, get your hands dirty type of community. And that's what we were doing with trying to save this house at 2340 Cecil B. Moore Avenue. So it kind of fit. There's a lot of synergy there. And so we kind of expanded into this project now, where we're waiting for the development of the house through our partners, Beach Interplex, which we're really, really happy about, starting about 6 years ago into where we are now in the printmaking world. So.
And maybe you can expand a bit later. Just, I think one of the exciting parts to me about the Doc Thrash project is that it happens in lots of different places. It challenges preservation thinking in lots of ways, including that it's not all about our kind of like very detailed nerding out about one particular house and one particular site. And there's something kind of mobile or fugitive, if you will, about printmaking and print culture that I think captures the experiences of civil rights activism better in a certain way than a house does or a building could. We'll come back to Doc Thrash, I'm sure. Melvin, can we ask you to say a little bit about the exhibition from 2003, From Challenge to Triumph, the full title, African American Prints and Printmaking, 1867 to 2002. I wish I could say I was in Brooklyn then. I wish I could say I had gone to see it. I say in embarrassment that I didn't know about it and didn't know that I should have gone see it. But tell us more about it for those of us who couldn't attend it 20 years ago.
At the time, Laurie Cumbo, she was the founder and executive director of the museum, and it was a new museum, and I joined forces right after she founded it to begin to build a program around what was the museum about. And so one of the first exhibits that we did was the From Challenge to Triumph exhibit, and the exhibit was it was a large undertaking. It was over 50 African American printmakers, and going back from 1867 to, at the time, 2002. So I wanted to get as many different types of printmaking in the show, and we did that. There was lithographs, serigraphs, pochoir prints. We had a beautiful Doc Thrash carborundum mezzotint. So there are many different types of prints. And I guess I wanted to do that exhibit because I just felt that was my sort of entree into collecting art. And so I figured, well, if this is a new area for you, then other people are gonna may be as interested. And so that was also my ability to learn more about it, write more about having pieces, 50 different artists. You really have to. I was like, okay, that's a lot of work. So the goal was to write about each and every artist, and I don't know if I accomplished that. I have the catalog right over here, but it was, it was quite extensive.
Yeah.
And that went through that, it was a chance to go through a lot of different periods in American history too. So it was art history and American history that I think was important.
That really resonates with my sense, and I think our center's sense that civil rights didn't happen between 1954 and 1968. And like that was a particular moment that I think there's a much greater awareness of. But the sweep of civil rights history is as long as American history. It is American history in many ways. So I think looking for the long arc of these stories or these traditions of art making, I think it is couldn't be more important. And we shouldn't, again, to reflect back on preservationist habits, we shouldn't just try to identify one most important period and try to go deep on that. We really have to value the broad view. So I was going to ask you, I am going to ask you a question about the the kinds of reactions that the show got, officially or unofficially, or just, in your minds, what kind of afterlives did it have? But I do want to read something very short that I was doing some research about the show, and the internet is great. Nothing ever disappears. So I don't have any pictures of you when you were in grade school, but the review that was in the Brooklyn Rail in 2003, you should probably have this on your office wall. It ends with saying, "From challenge to triumph is a world-class show. Mukata is a Brooklyn delight and deserves to be a regular stop on everyone's art list." So it was, an over-the-top review. Can you tell you a little bit more about what kind of reactions it got, and kind of what kind of afterlives you feel like it's had as a show about print culture?
Sure. Thanks for the question. The basis for what I wanted to do was look at the different themes that changed throughout America during this 1867 to 2002. So, you had things like, it was the early 20th century printmakers. You had the Depression era, the WPA. You had labor, poverty, racism, lynching motifs. You had the church motifs. There are so many different, per generation, I guess, decade that changed. And they're still changing today. So it would be interesting. I was just thinking about this the other day, that it'd be kind of interesting to do a 20-year retrospective of that show. And so did I answer your question?
You did. You asked another great question. We'll come back to in the end. So what, if we can say, well, okay, we'll do another version of it to 2022. What other pieces would you put in the show?
That'd be incredible.
And so you both get that question in a few minutes, I guess. Give me a chance to think about it. And of course, you guys are welcome to ask questions, across one to each other, and I shouldn't be the one asking all the questions. But Maya, can you say a little bit more about your kind of the connection that you're making and that you're thinking about in terms of connecting traditional forms of heritage to the kinds of visibility that artistic and print cultures are bringing on?
Sure. So because of the do-it-yourself kind of culture in printmaking, I think it gave us a lot of room to kind of make up things as we go. The house itself, the team, it's just not just me, but we have a few architects, we have a designer, we have lots of people in the preservation field and stuff like that together as a collective. And so because we could not focus on the house because the house had a tangled title and we had no owner and we had no one to kind of go to, for a long time we focused on the culture and the preservation of Doc Sprash and his legacy and his art itself, because Doc Sprash wasn't really well known. He was an artist that was facing kind of being unknown, and his house actually going away. And so we started focusing on that, what that means for this community, looking at the community itself, because there's so much art and other artists that live there, who visited. And so that lended ourselves to kind of be out front of a library and do printmaking activities, to print T-shirts to bring awareness to this cause, to actually start getting into zine making and what that means, and bringing out issues of preservation, issues of design justice, of gentrification in the neighborhood like Sharswood, that it's actively happening, and what that means. So we're able to bring out these kind of issues and bring it from a community level and a street level, and bring people's voices together because of the power of print and what that does. I know it's revolutionary to have this idea of print, but it's how a generation of people in the Middle Ages learned how to read, and became that became accessible, and that knowledge became accessible to people. And so if you apply that now to many generations later, what that means to visually see something in your neighborhood, to represent yourself, and you made it and it's out there in the world, has been really, really impactful to getting that message out, just not about the house itself, but also what you can do in a neighborhood that's facing gentrification, that's facing change in a community over time. So we've been really, really blessed to have this printmaker in this community that's having at the same time all these changes that are happening in this community, and being able to use print as a medium to talk about all of those things, and make it so accessible that they can just do it themselves. We naturally don't need to be there. We just get the artist, and then the artists come, and then they show them how to do it, and then we get into it, and kind of collaborate and get together and create community through that.
That's wonderful.
It's been great.
You make it sound like way easier than I'm sure it
No,
actually is.
It was.
Yeah, I'm sure. Sorry, some of the complexity. I think we would all benefit by hearing some of the complexities and some of the barriers that you have overcome to.
So Philadelphia is really territorial. I am not from Philadelphia. I am from Los Angeles, and I also went to this school. I was coming from this Ivy League Penn school, and I was like, "Hi, I'm Maya, and I'm very interested in this house." And it's like, "You don't live here," and I'm like, "That is true." Um, and so I had to learn a lot about culturally what's going on in Philadelphia, what the culture was, what the history of, what the pain was, what the traumas have been in this community, and try to speak to folks about that, and trying to get to something very practical about saving this house. There's a lot of steps that had to take place because the house, again, there was a tangled title, so we had no one to access directly. It can end up anywhere from like a lawsuit that's currently going on with the John Coltrane house. It's like very, very interesting, the things that could happen when you don't have a direct owner, and also had been sitting there for 20 or more years. So facing lots of weather and different conditions. The current condition of the house is pretty, and it's really rough. And so trying to convince a community to kind of say this is worth saving, especially capital P preservationists, and other folks like that, is been a challenge as well. So yeah, we have to start from the ground up. It's kind of like meeting people where they're at. Thinking about the future was also very important and integral for us, and using tenets of Afrofuturism to think about that. So looking about what the past neighborhood used to be, and we did all of that through like different engagement, community, sitting down with community, and talking with them about those aspects, and building that trust from that point.
Love it.
I'm also struck by the, not to see it in too simplistic terms, but Maya, your project is about kind of like getting out of buildings, into the community, onto the streets, almost, so to say. And Melvin, your work has been, kind of within the walls of galleries. I mean, two really important but very different ways to give these ideas about print culture and Black print culture visibility. So, Melvin, can you see do you see aspects of Maya's work at play also in what happened what happens with your work at Band of Vices in contemporary LA, and vice versa? Maya, are you thinking like some days you'd rather be in a gallery And
No, I don't want to be in the gallery, but I think
well,
it's useful.
do you see the kind of interplay between those two, kind of ways of reaching people, I guess, for lack of a better way
Yeah,
to say it.
I definitely see that. I do want to add on, attack on a different question, or add on to that question, because this exhibition that you did brought together Black printmakers,
Yes.
and as a collective and a unit, and I have yet to see that continue as like a crime, like a community of Black printmakers, to find them. I've been like piecing them together and bringing them and finding them. Every time I find them, I follow them on Instagram. So, what your thoughts about that?
Well,
And
that's
collecting.
actually,
Yeah,
that's a very, very good question, because I think
yeah,
that the go one of my, back in that exhibit, the From Challenge to Triumph exhibit, I brought on a co-curator, right? And this what the one I just finished at a co-curator. I'm a big believer in building networks. And so I think that one aspect of Instagram that's so interesting is that there are a lot of very talented people out there, but they're individually out there. They don't, there's no necessarily, this is generalization, but we need a few places where you can go, okay, I can go there and look at 10, 20 plus, artists who are doing prints. And I just find that people are, as you use this word, territorial, that it's not really serving them. So I see all this under the context that there's so much more work to be done, right? There's no time to be territorial, because it's just, you want to be a part of a larger collective, in my opinion, that, it's useful. And, then you have more eyeballs on you. You have more people to engage with what, your particular brand of your art practice. So anyway, that's one thing that we need to do better at. And, like right now, I'm just thinking that I have a connection to, the Center for the Preservation of Civil Rights Sites, and to you, Maya, with your Docs Thrash project. I think that's wonderful. So this could be a beginning of extending, these ideas.
I agree. So I do want to ask you a question about your writings for Art News. It's an essay that you wrote about Lauren Housley, who was a favorite of mine, who's working in Los Angeles. I love her work. And she's rethinking possibilities for art and architecture and community and engagement. And I wanted to see how you feel about the importance of highlighting somebody who's supporting African American community in those terms, along those lines, as an artist, and making space for artists and African American artists who present those types of questions, and how important you see that that way in working for an example of Laura Housley.
Well, that's a good question. Thank you for asking. I think that so the way that came about, Art News, I got a call from the executive editor, I guess, of Art News, and she's like, Hank Willis Thomas is going to be our guest host of the December 2021 issue. I said, okay, and he's asked me to reach out to you to write an article on somebody of importance to you. I said, oh, okay. And the way that happened was in, I think it was early 2004, I curated Hank Willis Thomas's first solo show in Miami. And right now he is one of the world's top artists, in my opinion. And so it was incredible, almost 20 years later, to get a call like that from, somebody. It's like, oh, okay. So anyway, so I picked Lauren Halsey because I think that she's a very important artist who's doing important work. One of her organizations, she has this organization called Summer Everything, and it is a community center where part of the job is to feed people in the South Central and Watts communities. And I think that is incredible. And then she also, so the aspect of Lauren's work is, it is local LA. It is, it's about the demographic. It's about the geography. It's about every aspect of LA that she's bringing forward to the world, for the world to see. Her idea is that, well, if ancient Egypt is so loved around the world, why can't the world love South Central and Watts communities as well? And I think that that's exactly right. So she's wedding, she's building a bridge between ancient Egypt and South Central and Watts, LA. And I think that's unique. It's wonderful. It is, she's a very humble person who is just doing very important work. And again, so this idea, she's bringing, the idea of bringing the margin, people on the sidelines, people, the ignored people, into the center. And I think that
Can you
go ahead, yeah.
Can you talk about her impact in Los Angeles with that work, with some of everything? How do you perceive that? Are you thinking people are receiving that? I know the art world loves it, but the people in the community, Los Angeles Watts, who are participating in these programs, do you think there's like a cross section of like learning about art and then also getting the things that they need, the resources that they need, in that kind of sense?
That's another great question, and the answer is resounding yes. And I think it's unusual for, I think, an artist to have a strong gallery presence. And she's with one of the top art galleries in LA, the David Kordansky Gallery. And she also has a very strong presence in the community. You always see her out at openings. She's always out and about. And I think that connection that she has is important, and the community values it and they appreciate it. So yes. So the answer to your question is yes.
It's sorry to interject for a second. It's certainly one of the truths that I've learned in historic preservation, that profound change is not going to get made unless we change the organizations involved in the work and supporting the work and funding the work and just the expectations for the work. So it's not as a matter of it's like doing the same things we do better, faster, slicker, with greater craft. The really profound change is going to come from changing the kind of underpinnings and infrastructure of the work. Seems like Lauren Halsey's work, by addressing community needs so directly, like eating and growing
right.
food and
Right.
making those connections to everyday life, like far more profound and a kind of more alternative or even transgressive kind of art practice. Maybe not a transgressive art practice, because I guess the question is, do you see other kinds of innovation of that sort, not so much in the kind of the craft and vision behind the artwork, but in art connecting to everyday lives in communities, including the artwork?
I think that's another good question, because I think that when you think about printmaking, it is that, actually, right? It is that, there's like, well, a lot of people can afford, my expensive big paintings, but they can't afford if I do a run of prints. And so that is, another way to connect to, the everyday. Because, I think so frequently you have, the very well-known a handful or two of African-American artists these days, their individual works are so expensive that they know, like I think one of the things that Lauren Halsey does is she goes, make sure that I want to put certain works aside. I want you to make sure that a Black collector owns it. And that's, another way that she's loved in the community, because she understands the value of her work, and that usually it can only go to rich white people. And she's like, well.
And I think that's so important, because you end up with like works of art, parts of our culture outside of our culture.
That's right.
And so it becomes part. There's a motif where everyone has Martin Luther King and now Obama and JFK on their walls. But imagine if there's lots of Black people who have access to art and they have that as an expression on their walls, and they met Lauren because they were in the community, and now they have this amazing print.
Right.
And it brings that stuff out of these like white wall boxes
right.
where only art collectors can have.
That's right.
People who have money can have this stuff, but it brings beauty back to neighborhoods, and it brings that culture and pride back to neighborhoods. And it also empowers people because for me, and looking at artwork, a lot of people say, I could do that. Why is it so worth it? Like, why is it so expensive? And I think a lot of people look at that and can imagine themselves doing that and creating wealth for themselves. So I think that's super important. And I think printmaking is an important medium because it is that aspect of you can enter into it and you can do it yourself and then learn and build upon your art practice from there.
Do you think, well, let me think if you agree with this. It seems to me like that what you just described, Melvin, is, kind of challenging the gentrification of Black art.
Sure. Okay.
And,
yes.
and that seems like kind of, of a, sharing kind of hearts and minds with Doc's Thrash House as one among a number of efforts in Philadelphia to resist and push back on gentrification of neighborhoods, and specifically North Philly.
Yes, I think that it is, I just see this whole idea as a collective. We got to build collectively, because there are different aspects of the same question that we can't all touch at the same time. So what you're doing with the civil rights sites, okay, well, that's not my expertise, and but I think that there's just great synergies that are available, that I think we all have to continue to just do the work. We got to continue to do the work.
Yeah. I guess the other the kind of thought below that thought about that you're both talking about, kind of forms of resisting gentrification, is that as soon as we kind of welcome the market into to dealing with art or heritage or any other aspect of culture, it's kind of a double-edged sword, that it can raise its visibility and literally its value. But it also builds in a kind of exclusiveness that we have to, to really, purposefully protect against. So as you say, like a fine artist making a run of prints to make her work more accessible to more people. Doc's Thrash House, like literally taking it in front of the library down the street to really kind of popularize it and make it no cost, if not very low cost. That I think is a kind of an important warning for preservationists, to the extent that preservationists are successful in recognizing and bringing more people to civil rights sites. There is, let's face it, there's a market for heritage tourism, and some of the same dynamics are likely to be at play. Right. So, a question to ourselves: what are we doing to prevent the gentrification of civil rights sites as we seek to recognize more of them and preserve them?
Good. It's a very, very good question.
Now you have to give me the answer.
So I think a lot of the politics here, I find a lot of the preservation work is taking place in the neighborhoods. The folks that live there know their history, but are not and feel kind of disempowered about what to do about it sometimes. And I do want to say that joining like your neighborhood CDC, joining your neighborhood board that's talking about what's going on as far as zoning and all those things are very, very important things as far as activism and knowing what's upcoming in your neighborhood. Knowing about the OPA office in Philadelphia and typing those informations in and looking at all the titles and all the developers that are coming to your neighborhood, it's important to kind of use those tools and kind of decentralize that information, because I think people think it's like, how do you find out about this stuff and it's on the internet? And I think a lot of groups kind of rally around themselves and making sure that they know about or are around their own history and own their own history, and not kind of outsource it to anyone else that's not a part of their neighborhood, and kind of demand that. It's super important for that to happen, especially for folks who own property, have lived there for years, have generational wealth, and maintaining their homes and making sure that their grandchildren know about their history, that they're all the way down to having a will, making sure that their grandchildren can hold on to that wealth. It's so important. I think people don't understand, like, every day you can definitely do those things to make sure that opposing forces are not just coming into your neighborhood. It creates a community power to talk to your neighbors, to make sure there's a will within your family, and to also know about and pass on that history, and then be active in that community to make sure it stays. That's like key to preventing some of this stuff, because I think a lot of people are reacting after it's too late, and it's so important to make sure you're preventing some of this stuff, and you're a strong community of folks and people. So that's been my experience. I had the privilege to kind of find out about the Doc Slash House early, saw a map of like lots of lots that were vacant, and knew immediately what was about to happen. Just from experience and knowing, and everybody else probably knew what was about to happen too because of the development pressures all around it.
Yeah.
And wanted to do something about it. So I think those are important. I'll stop talking now.
No, we could go on for hours, and I keep taking. I got my pages full of notes. So we do have a couple of questions that are building up in the Q&A. So if it's okay, if I read some of those or bring some of those into the conversation, although I don't want to close off any conversation or questions you guys have back and forth in the meantime. But there were a couple of questions specifically about. From challenge to triumph, Melvin.
Yes.
One of them was just to talk a little bit about the title, from challenge to triumph, and maybe expand on that a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, when I was, okay, you're making me go back 20 years. Thanks. Well, the idea was that Black people had come from such an unfair advantage that it was a challenge to get to be able to do something like create art, create artwork. And so I thought the triumph was, and so the starting in 1867 was the day of the first print. And then forward to 2002, where we had triumphed in terms, there's a triumph involved in terms of there are many more people creating artwork.
Yeah.
And we had gone through that's 135 years, I guess, to the exhibit. Yeah. So there's a long time frame that had been there have been many advances made by Black people in printmaking, such as Doc Slash. He had co-founded his own carborundum mezzotint type of print. So that.
Yeah, so there was a question from the same person, Elizabeth, who asked a bit more to, I think, the kind of art historical question and craft question about she's asking how the themes and colors, et cetera, I guess technologies of prints changed over the years in Black art, and maybe as represented, let's say, for instance, through your show, or just otherwise through your knowledge of like how Black print culture has evolved over those 150 years.
It has evolved, greatly, and there are many different types of prints that are available. I'd be remiss if I don't mention the Robert Blackburn printmaking shop in New York City that's still going on. He's passed, but just he had a very important role in making sure that many well-known artists of the day created prints. Elizabeth Catlett. I can't name remember Bearden. There are many important artists who did prints at his printmaking workshop in New York City.
I just want to add that a lot of Black artists working in printmaking also did it as a form of resistance. And we're talking about they were doing protests, they were making these prints, they were doing it in response to what was happening around them. I know for Doc Thrash, in creating the carborundum mezzotint print, he wanted to be able to create or print out Black life to show it in a humanizing way, because there was definitely lynching campaigns going all over the place. It was very, very high during, and the NAACP was trying to fight that. So as an artist working during that time, he wanted to show what Black life was and humanize African Americans and Black people. And so I think a lot of printmakers are responding to that, especially Black ones, and responding to what the errors are. And I know we've seen all these protests, and some of them, people have created beautiful art from that. And we've unfortunately had to, a lot of times, creating art from this pain, but it's probably the pinnacle of why it's so good, because of the moments and the times that we've been fighting for justice and equality in this country.
Right. So at that time, there was, the issues were labor. So these prints were about labor, police brutality, poverty, lynching motifs. And today we still have this police brutality idea. Yeah. There's racism. So they're similar, but that's one way that over the 135 years, it has changed and advanced, I think.
And I imagine it wouldn't be a stretch to say that 20 years from now, the printmaking and print culture will be technologically different, but just as deeply and profoundly politically motivated because of the not to be too cynical, but our society is not going to change like that, even if we had the will to change it. So I think that this, the depth of this tradition is so strong. We know that in 20 years from now, you can make that next version of Challenge to Triumph and have an equally strong and equally politically motivated and grounded and body of work to draw on, because it'll be needed, and it'll be needed.
I think, right, in terms of, in the 60s and 70s, that's the civil rights movement. And then today we have the Black Lives Matter movement, right? And the Me Too movement. So, we still have these things that is political, the social protests and the political activism is still happening today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let me, there's a really great question from my colleague, Dr. Matt Kenyatta here at Penn. I'm just going to read it, so excuse me for the inelegant presentation, but isn't there a difference between reinvestment from gentrification? Can we disentangle white gentrification from Black, gay, and other forms of gentrification, and gentrification from displacement, especially given the decades of underinvestment that puts Black historic spaces in physical and economic deficit or disadvantage?
Good question. Yes, thank you for asking that question, Dr. Matt. So I think white gentrification is a process of like colonization, if I wanted to use a word. It's basically this kind of association are not caring about what's already there and kind of implanting that culture or what that is into a place that had been underdeveloped economically for a very, very long time, and kind of taking advantage of that situation. I think Black gentrification can be seen as like a self-determined process, where folks are coming together and kind of reinvesting in their communities, doing things like making sure the wealth stays in their family, and making sure bringing in businesses, and going to those businesses and supporting those businesses, and recognizing the value in their own communities and their lives, et cetera, et cetera. So though I think those are, it's important. I like that Dr. Matt asked this question, because gentrification is a scary word and people get really, really upset really, really fast. And we kind of want to talk about it in a form of like empowering folks, and empowering people to feel like this is a process that's accessible to you and that you could do as well. If you think about it from a different perspective, I think it served me well not being from Philadelphia to have a different perspective. And I think it's important for people to kind of think about it not from a trauma and pain kind of sense, which is valid, but also thinking about is how I can help myself and my family and my community, before anybody else comes and tells me what the value of this place is. I already know what it is, so let me invest in it. I think that's super, super important to know about it. And then also, it just brings icing on a cake when you know that your neighborhood is a historic neighborhood. So it's been like that for a long time. You have Doc Splash that live there. You have folks, there were theaters there, there are shops there. People loved, the stories that I've heard, people would dress up and go to Ridge Avenue, and kind of like show out and have this rich history, and of culture and stuff like that. So that's something to be proud of. And I think it's using historic preservation as a means to kind of spur that has been, I think, is a really, really, really good aspect for folks to kind of take pride in and take back their communities, and thinking about this processes and development. I hope that answers his question.
I think that's, that's I think, that takes us on a really productive path, Maya, and I think it was very well said. It also is like you're already beginning to answer the next question that came in from Helene, also from California. Hello, Helene. She says, very much appreciate Maya's advocacy for the will within families to own their own history as the foundation of community power. And she asks, has Maya created a program that shows families how they can use printmaking to advance that goal?
So fortunately, Philadelphia has this really amazing register of wills, who's already doing that work. So what I did was just piggyback off of that, and create this. We've expanded because of the house is in an amazing neighborhood. We've expanded and started making zines about different aspects of this neighborhood, the history. The city of Philadelphia just started to raise the property taxes, which is huge, to about 30%. So we released a zine about what those property taxes mean. And there's two sides to look at that. It's basically, if you can't afford it, this is what you can do. But if you can afford it, this is how you keep that wealth in your family. And then I lucked out because the Register of Wills already had all that information there. I go her. I can't remember her name. I need to call her by name, but she was already there ready with all the information. And so I'm hoping getting more folks involved in that and talking about that conversation. That's the way that we've used printmaking and print, to kind of sit down with community, talk about these issues, write it down. And so when they talk with their neighbor, they can have something to say, this is what I learned.
Yeah.
And then here's where you can go. So yeah.
Can I say, well, I want to add one thing about this, my From Challenge to Triumph show. I just wanted to show this was the cover, if you guys can see that. And that piece up there is a piece by Emma Amos. And then the back cover was one piece about lynching and that. So I think the reason why I wanted to show that this exhibit was actually really quite a political, social. So it wasn't just a pretty show of 50, Black artists who did, right? So it was actually a very current. It had to do with, at the time, Amadou Diallo had just been shot 41 times in Brooklyn, and so it was these kinds of issues that were at the forefront of why I wanted to create this kind of exhibit. Yeah, I just wanted to add that part. That it wasn't just a pretty show,
Well, maybe
it was a pretty show, but I mean, what?
Not just, yeah. No, thank you for sharing that, and it makes me feel like we should have given you guys a chance to show more images, since we've been talking about images. So maybe next time around we'll have dialogue number 2 with Melvin Marshall, and Maya Thomas with images. So we just have a couple minutes left, and I did want to go back to whatever last words you both wanted to share, but maybe to return to that question, is that if the show was if a show or the show was redone today with another last 20 years of work to draw on, is there anyone in mind or any work in mind that you would want to pull into the show?
I mean, there's so many more of the last. I can't even begin to talk about that. We'd be here for another hour, seriously. If I mean that is, what's funny is that you've just really gotten me going. Say you need to do a reprieve of the show now. So 1867 to 2023. Oh my goodness! Wow. Right.
You got your co-curators, so they're right here.
I mean, right. We imagine that. No, seriously, I think that would be an incredible show of, prints. To just look at how have how the themes have changed and stayed the same over this, because a lot of these themes, they've stayed the same. It's incredible. Thank you, Randy. You've really gotten me to think about,
Great.
I'm just now getting into who's out there in the printmaking world, and I'm collecting them. And if you know folks, send them my way because I'm following everyone.
Great. Okay.
Just so because I'm just fascinated about what the work is and what they're doing and how they're doing it, and I just know. In general, I know the printmaking community is small, and so the Black printmaking community is even smaller. And I'm inspired with the Doc Slash House being a place And being from Los Angeles and looking like a place that like self-help graphics and what's that's
Yeah.
fun for Latino and Mexican American printmakers, I'm wondering if that's something like that who could happen for us in Philadelphia for Black printmakers.
I think we need to collaborate.
Yes, I would
That
love to.
okay, yeah, great.
Before I still want to give you guys a chance to say last word, but I wanted to also like give a little bit of homework assignment for those who are in the audience. If you guys have artists, if anyone has an artist in mind that they wanted to bring forth, like pop it in the Q&A or the chat right now, and we can send a list that we generate back to everyone. But I think that kind of crowdsourcing this burgeoning work would might also be helpful. But so with that, Melvin and Maya, if you wanted to just say some kind of parting words or parting advice or parting wisdom, a minute each or something like that, then we'll be able to finish right on the nose.
Okay, Maya, you want to go first?
I just want to tell everybody what we're doing right now. we have an active campaign. We actually have a collection of Doc Slash's work, a collection of over 400 pieces that's owned by a Black family, and who we're partnered with. And we're trying to raise funds because we want to bring that collection to North Philly and teach from it and learn from it and show it to folks in a real way. Yes, of drawings, paintings, watercolors, and it's over a period of time from the 1930s all the way up to the 60s. He was working, so it's a great collection. We're going to show it in February for folks who committed and given us donated to that campaign. And then we're also have the privilege. We've been invited out this Saturday to the Zine Fest at Temple's on Temple's campus. If you guys want to come out and see us and learn more, we will be there talking to folks.
It's wonderful.
And thank you guys for having me. It was great talking to you and meeting you, Melvin. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great.
Melvin, any final words?
I would just like to briefly read something. This is about got a few questions about why we named our gallery Band of Vices, and this was written by one of our partners. There was a time when it was bad to be Black, a time when brown was illegal, a time when being gay or queer was immoral, a time when those less able was abominable. There were times when being different was a vice. We reject those labels. For those historically undervalued, overlooked, or cast aside, we say now is your time, now is our time. We are creating a band of vices. So our mission is to harness our differences to create a greater whole. We support our strong voices and community. So that's really the idea of what we're trying to accomplish.
Powerful, very powerful. And let those be our parting thoughts, and everyone take that back to their own lives and desks, and let this kind of work flourish, or make this kind of work flourish, whatever we can do in our own communities to help it flourish. Melvin, Marshall, thank you so much for joining us. Maya Thomas, great to see you again. Thank you for joining us. And everyone who spent the last hour with us, we really appreciate your attention and your interest. And please let us know either at our website or through email if you have any other ideas about artists that you like to see foregrounded, or other issues you'd like to see us have a dialogue about. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and go forth and take care.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.